This is A Voice, a podcast with Dr. Gillyanne Kayes and Jeremy Fisher.
This is A Voice.
Welcome to the podcast, and this is episode 7, and this is The Stories Behind the Stories, part 2. I'm Jeremy Fisher.
And I'm Dr. Gillyanne Kayes.
And the reason we've got a part 2 is in the episode 5, which was the first Stories Behind the Stories, we talked about the two of our first books. Shall I start that again? I'm just in a bizarre place at the moment. Okay, episode 5, The Stories Behind the Stories, the first time we did this, was talking about the first 2 books that we wrote, which were Singing in the Actor and Successful Singing Auditions. And now we're going to move on to the next set of books that we wrote, which is Singing Express. And not that many people know that we wrote this series.
Yeah, I think people wouldn't automatically associate us with writers for children.
Yeah.
And indeed, that would be quite reasonable, as neither of us have had children.
Yes.
And actually, I haven't had much experience teaching kids except at the very beginning of my career.
Yeah.
And I always preferred to work with from about 11 plus.
Yeah, I prefer 21 plus. Why on earth were we asked to write Singing Express? Because Singing Express is a set of 4 books for kids age 7 to...
Up to...
No, isn't it earlier than that? No, it's earlier than that. It's 5. It's 5 to 9.
It is, yes.
5 to 9, there you go.
In fact,
long ago.
You might even get to early years for Singing Express 1.
Yeah.
I certainly know of people who've used them at preschool and said the kids have really enjoyed them.
Okay, so what's the story behind the story?
The story behind the story is, once again, my friend Anna Sanderson got me into deep water.
Yeah, hello, Anna.
There I was, happily having started a PhD, and Anna rang me up one day, and she was working at A&C Black at that time and had been working there for several years in the music department.
Yeah, A&C Black is a publishers.
As a composer and
very prestigious publishers.
A writer. Yes, and they had a very, very good track record for music education books.
Yes.
So Anna rang me up and said, Gilly, I don't know if you know, but we've had a very successful series called Music Express. And, it's been rolled out in all of the schools and, it's been doing very well for several years. So we were thinking about, wouldn't it be a good idea to do one called Singing Express? Because, the voice is also an important instrument, and it's an instrument that everybody can use. And currently, because this was, 2009? No, it was before then. 2008, because I started it before we moved house.
Yes.
Because we moved to Wales in 2009.
Yep.
Yeah, this is a long time ago, people. We're digging into our memory banks
Yep.
here. So let's say that we started work on it in 2008. I think that would be about right.
Yep.
And... at that time, there was a sort of a change in government policy in the UK, and there was a real movement towards doing more singing in schools.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, also, by the way, the great thing about singing is that you can still learn all the music, things like rhythm and pitching and intonation and melody and harmony, but you don't have to have an instrument there.
Absolutely. The instrument is free.
Yeah.
So this was Anna's thinking, and it was very good thinking. So my first response was, but I don't know anything about children.
Yeah.
Don't worry, said Anna. I've got 2 of them. And I've been writing for children for decades. Yeah. And we have all of that experience here at A&C Black.
I was going to say that department was particularly good at writing kids' stuff.
Absolutely.
So we had a great department behind us.
And I think Anna's thinking, quite rightly, was, well, the voice is the voice, so the way that the voice works, surely it's not that much different in children's voices. Anna's thinking was the voice is the voice. Now, I had a feeling that it might not be quite like that, and for the simple reason that my primary PhD supervisor was Professor Graham Welch, world-leading expert on child voice education.
Yep.
And I sort of knew from having conversations with him that it might not be quite like that, but more of that later. So, what we started off by doing was we sort of brought some songs to the table. We talked about learning areas, sort of learning zones, and how could we make singing technique, first of all, accessible and fun for kids. And the other really big thing was that this was aimed at the generalist teacher for use in the classroom. Now, for those of you who aren't in the UK, a generalist teacher obviously teaches any subject. They are not a music specialist. Therefore, they are SHIT scared of singing in front of people.
And wasn't X Factor and Pop Idol and all those stuff?
All of those things were just starting.
At the time, they were just
Simon
starting.
Cowell has quite a lot to be responsible for, because actually his name was mentioned in some of the early research sessions that they did with teachers to find out what it was that they thought they needed. And they said that they were afraid of being ridiculed because the quality of their voice wasn't very good, although, you know, they could sing in tune.
I think it was one of the sort of rather unfortunate byproducts of programmes like that, because there are some good ones, but that suddenly everybody became a very vocal armchair critic of anything singing.
So, I mean, this was much more about writing a few songs. We really wanted the scheme, first of all, to be relevant to primary school education and all of those topics, and secondly, to all of the songs and the activities. I learned that you do activities in books like this. Children don't just do, learning the music and learning the songs. There are other modes of learning. And that all of the songs and activities needed to have some kind of focus, because we knew, even I knew, that you weren't going to get 5-year-olds to do singing exercises. That wasn't how it was going to go.
It doesn't actually work either.
And certainly as you get further up the scale, they wouldn't want to do that.
I should just say at the moment that I actually wasn't involved with books 1 and 2 at all. So this is very much Gillyanne and Anna.
So that was the first problem, which is how do you deliver voice skills out of a more traditional exercise context? And how do you make them deliverable within a classroom context? And the deliverable within a classroom context was very much A&C Black's expertise, and obviously mine was the voice. So what we came up with, I'm just going to have a quick look here. We came up with these...
Just before you go into that, I just want to say that in the books, in fact in all 4 books, you have charts, games, stories, songs, whiteboard movie demos, backing tracks, vocal learning path.
So it's very much multimedia.
Very much multimedia, So, and even then we were doing audio CD, whiteboard, DVD, it was the DVD-ROM then, video DVDs, so we had movies made, we had both example tracks with the singer and backing tracks without the singer.
Yeah, so the idea was, and I think it was a great concept, that the generalist music teacher who was scared of singing could put the DVD-ROM on and put the whiteboard presentation on and go. She would never need to sing in front of the children, or could sing with the children. So they were not having to teach by call and response, which of course is the normal way that we do this.
Yes.
So going back to sort of my area, which was the 5 key vocal learning areas, that's what we came up with. And we came up with body balance. And a really key thing for us was we weren't going to really talk about posture because it's not about fixing. The second area was breath and understanding how breath is used in the body and all sorts of games and things that can be done with that. Pitching. And what we did with pitching, and this came about after the meeting with Professor Welch, of which more later.
This is just a tease.
Yeah, another tease. We separated between pitch exploration, sort of, making noises and sounds and getting a sense of where pitch lives in space or in our bodies. And pitch matching, which of course is the more user-friendly way of talking about singing in tune.
Pitch matching I think is really interesting because any time that you are with anybody else at all, so if you might be singing, 2 of you might be singing a cappella but in harmony together, or even singing the same melody together, the same thing, or any time you're with an instrument, you are basically you have to be in tune with whatever is going on around you.
And actually this was one of the big things as well that came up with the the research into teachers, because a questionnaire was sent out. This is the best way to find out what your audience need with a huge collaborative project like this. They were worried about, well, what if I can't pitch? You know, the wonderful word pitchy that came out of these reality TV singing programs. Oh, it's a bit pitchy.
Yeah.
So pitch matching is different from pitch exploration. Then we talked about sound shapers, which, you know, in more traditional approach we would talk about in terms of resonance, but how we use the mouth, what's happening with the tongue, maybe the jaw, what's happening with our lips and how we shape the sound that way. And I learned that in primary school they learn phonics, and so that was a great way for us to link with the phonics learning that kids are doing at that point in time for written language and verbal language.
Yep.
And then finally we went for expression, because we thought this was important. Expression, songs tell stories or they create moods, and that would also allow for things like, you know, maybe manner of articulation and exploring tonal colours, you know, raw noises, pretty noises, all sorts of things.
So that's five sections, and the 5 key vocal learning areas were put into, that was always behind all of the writing,
Absolutely.
all the way through all 4 books. So you've got body balance, breath, pitch, sound shapers and expression.
Yeah. Now, I do want to talk about the first meeting with Professor Graham Welch.
Yeah.
And then what I'd like to talk about is that we had also an introduction and a help area, which I have to say I'm really proud of. So we said, yes, you know, Graham Welch, could we come and have a meeting? And it was myself and Anna and sort of the creative editor, and we'd got a sort of mock-up whiteboard presentation of a song, which I think was called Hum, Hum, Hum. And we were quite pleased with this song. You know, we looked at it, we thought this was a good vocal learning song. So Professor Welch sat there and watched the whole thing. It was quite quiet, and he said, have you noticed that the range of this song is a 12th? And
That's an octave and a half.
Looked at each other, bit of an eye roll. And he said, if you want to be inclusive of all children in the classroom at their stages of pitch matching, you must always include songs that are only a 6th in pitch span.
So like C to A.
Yeah, at every level. So we kind of went into shock, and we realised that all of the songs we got together, we thought, oh, these are really nice music. You know, we really like this song. This is a great song. This is a good song. From a musical point of view, oh, that's very interesting. Nope. That is not going to work when you're writing for kids.
I think I want to pick this apart, because I think so many times, and even after the even after the books were published, we used to go and watch people do choral sort of training presentations for kids, and their opening piece would be an octave and a half. And I think this is really interesting, because people who tend to do, and I'm doing a big generalization here, people who tend to do choral training tend to be musicians, and they are really attracted to big ranges, complex harmonies, complex melodies, complex rhythms, because they're interesting and exciting. And when you're working with kids who are still in the stages of pitch change, which we're going to talk about in a minute, sometimes they have 3 notes, sometimes they have 6 notes, sometimes they have 7 notes. You know, they don't have an octave and a half easily accessible, or even sometimes at all. So one of the things was, it was one of the reasons I think that you included chanting, you included limited range things, you know, 3 notes, 4 notes, 5 notes, and 90% of all 4 books only go over a 6th. Or possibly a 7th. I know that in book 3 there was one song that we thought was so good, and it was something like a 10th that we included it anyway, but it was the exception rather than the rule.
And we put a note about that. I mean, this was a real shock, because I have to say, you know, we had a nice batch of songs.
Yeah.
several inches deep, and we had to throw most of those out, and we had to go right back to the drawing board.
I want to bring up the composers as well, because so much of the music that was involved in this series was either arranged for us or composed for us specially. And when we told the composers, I mean, we had a real team of them, and we said you can only write over a range of a seventh. I think they went into shock as well, because it was so unusual. At that time, that was such an unusual brief for a composer to write a kid's song that only covered 6 or 7 notes.
Yes. And I think it was a real eye-opener to find out about, the research that Professor Welch was engaged in at that time, actually. And, the first findings came out in about 2009. And they were looking into the National Singing Programme. And, what they found was, what are the kids aged 7 to 8, the G below middle C to the B just above middle C, that's considered comfortable singing range. And it's only when you get to ages 10 and 11 that you could be going down to the F below and then staying comfortably up to that C above middle C. This is comfortable singing range as opposed to extended. So that you needed to have the main bank of your songs within that comfortable singing range, so that it was viable for the kids to do them. And as we progressed with the series, what we could say to those who were interested in developing singers' range was, we'll try the song out in different keys.
Yes.
And challenge the kids to sing higher and lower.
I mean, we've been teasing them with the whole 4 stages of pitch matching thing, and I think we should go there now.
I don't see why we shouldn't. Have you got it? Have you got it off pat? Or
No.
No, I think it is here.
Yes. This was such an. Oh, it isn't, is it? How interesting. Okay, this was such an eye-opener. We actually still use this on our training courses. We used it last week on the online singing teacher training course that we do, which is 5 days completely online. Okay, so stage number 1. And by the way, kids go through this. Some just zoom through them really, really fast. Some go through them very slowly. Some get stuck. Thank you.
I found it.
Some get stuck. And in fact, some adults are still stuck in this set of 4
sequence.
The sequence. And I think even that is just interesting to know. So I have, this is Singing Express 1. I have that here.
And there's a help area at the back of it.
Yes. So in the help area, we have the 4 stages of development adapted from Professor Welch and his 1998 research. And this is phase 1, words rather than melody. So the singing is likely to be chant-like with a very restricted pitch range, and the falling melodic pattern, da-da, happens more often.
You know how the kids, they love to pick up all those words, and that they'll come out with them, and they're mouthing them because they're at that stage where they've begun to get control of language, and they love words. And
in fact, I did, and we will put the link up, I did a demonstration of the 4 stages of pitch matching, which is now on our YouTube, the YouTube channel, youtube.com/vocalprocess. 4 stages of pitch matching. I basically sang a song demonstrating the 4 different things.
You did. It was rather impressive, actually.
Great.
I think you got a round of applause, if I remember rightly.
Huge fun to do that was.
So that's stage 1.
Phase 1 is very chant-like. Rhythm is normally spot on. Words are normally spot on. Pitch nowhere near. Phase 2, developing awareness and conscious control of pitch, able to follow larger melodic contours of a song. Now, this is the interesting bit. There's a sense of musical key, but it's phrase-based. So you are likely to get approximately the right shape in a phrase, but then when the next phrase starts, we're in a completely different key.
And people, you will recognise this with some of your adult beginner singers.
Yeah. I recommend you go, because I do a beautiful demonstration on the YouTube channel. Phase 3, increased accuracy of melodic shape and intervals, but may change key while control of vocal range is still in development. So you've moved on a bit further.
Yeah.
We're now able to recognise the melody clearly, but still there's not the ability to maintain a key through several phrases.
Yeah, and also I think one of the important things about this is if you think about ages 7 to 8, the comfortable range was G below middle C up to the B above. Most of that is what we would think of as being chest voice range.
Yep.
speak, singing, voice range.
Yeah.
And that if a child doesn't listen to music where they hear people going into their upper range, into their head voice, or the child has never used that, then if a song starts to stray into that area, then what they'll do is they'll drop down so they can still manage the melodic pattern. We hear this when we listen to people singing in church, don't we?
Yes, or in the restaurant. Yes.
Yeah.
And then phase 4 is no significant melodic or pitch errors when singing relatively simple songs of own culture. And we really need to unpick that bit at the end, because relatively simple songs, so people can get them correct, of their own culture. So there is something about the tonality or the melody or the history that is in their brain, in their psyche already, and they can recognise those notes and reproduce them correctly.
And I would guess it's also the listening culture at home, whatever their parents listen to, what the kids watch on television, what kind of music is being used on television, even the music that accompanies adverts.
Yes.
So all of that, in a way, that's more kind of socio-cultural, but that's definitely going to impact.
And people who run community choirs are going to recognise those stages straight away.
And I do want to say something here, the fact that I haven't worked that much with kids except in my early career, I still hear people talking about, oh, there's a few droners in my choir, or there's a few droners in my class, what shall I do? There aren't droners. All you have there is people at stage 1 pitch matching.
Yes, so they will almost certainly be able to do the rhythm and the words.
Yeah.
So you may be able to hear I think we're just about to be attacked by a plane.
A little bit of humming.
Yes, there's a flyover going on.
So that was a very, very fruitful meeting with Professor Welch.
That was a bit of a facer.
We definitely knew more by the end of it. It was incredibly useful, and he was very kind enough to write us a foreword as well. And I think it really contributed to the value of this particular series.
I think one of the reasons also that we actually quite enjoyed working on this is the idea that we have a massive catalogue of vocal techniques. We have a huge catalogue of physiological understanding. And it's for this level, we couldn't essentially, we knew who the audience was and we couldn't do lots and lots of detail. What we had to do was the practical application of it rather than the theoretical or the physiological or anything like that, because the language wouldn't have worked for this audience. And I think that's one of the things about finding your voice as a writer. It is interesting that our first 7 books were commissions, and therefore we had a specific audience given to us to write for. And so part of the skill of being a writer of vocal technique books is that you need to know who you're aiming at. In fact, it's 8 because it's the Oxford Handbook of Singing as well, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Because
if we've got the energy left.
At the same time as writing this set of books for children and their teachers, we were also writing 2 chapters for the Oxford Handbook of Singing, which is basically academic level, where everything had to be demonstrated, everything had to be
validated and peer reviewed. Yeah.
So we were writing at 2 entirely different levels, and then Gillyanne was doing a PhD as well at the same time. And I was in a darkened room. Waiting for her to come out.
There's a few things. If there's been a little bit of a rustling in the background, it's because I've been opening up the book and looking for 1 or 2 things I wanted to share with you. One of the things that we wanted to make absolutely clear to people was the idea that, first of all, every child has the potential to sing.
Yeah.
And we felt that instead of being geared towards you must learn the song and get the song right, the job was to develop the singer. So we came up with this phrase, the singer first, then the song.
Yeah. Which in fact we still do.
It was pretty much how we think of it anyway.
Still now.
So that's the focus, is developing the singer and their response to music. Music reading, not a requirement. Really, really important to understand that.
And again,
music literacy. Musicality does not depend on musical literacy.
I think that was fairly unusual when this was written, because often singing books just automatically assume that you read music, and we didn't want to do that. And partly because we've been working with actors for so long, for 20, 30 years, many of whom at the time certainly, and still now, don't read music or read it very, very badly. And to me, to be an actor and get up on stage, it's not important to know whether that's a quaver or a crotchet.
Yeah. So that kind of realization of what melody is, and pattern, duration, which is rhythm, and pulse, and dynamic and timbre, which by the way are all kind of goals in music education. All of those were kind of outcomes of the songs and the learning activities that they did, rather than being spelled out in the text of the work, if you like.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. And we also talked about how a child voice differs from an adult's voice, that it's not just a case that it's smaller, but it's the smallness has different levels of importance. The lungs are smaller, so you're not going to develop breath control by using adult-sized phrases. You can expect a different timbre because the larynx is smaller. The texture of the vocal folds different, etc. All of those things that anybody who's interested in the lifespan of the voice is aware of.
I just want to sort of move on, because this project took 3 or 4 years altogether to put together. Books 1 and 2 were published, and then we were contracted to do books 3 and 4, and I was brought in to expand the musical styles, really.
Yeah, I felt that we were getting to a stage where I'd given the advice needed on the vocal learning targets, but that when it came to expanding the musical scope, that we really needed someone else, and I felt Jeremy was the right person for that.
I had such fun. I've never had a team of composers to play with before. That was so much fun. So we would have a song, and that song might exist or it might be written for us. And particularly then we had another team of arrangers. It wasn't always the composer who arranged the songs for the books. So the song would arrive and we'd go, yes, love the song, love the lyrics, that's going to work really well, great range. And then I'd send it off to the arranger. And to start with, it was like, well, we need something, and it would be quite a detailed list of things. And by the end of it, there was one arranger in particular, and I would go, can we have something that's sort of sparkly Disney? And that would be it. That would be the only thing, the only instruction I'd give. And what came back was fantastic.
It was gorgeous,
because he
that one,
absolutely
wasn't it?
got
Yes.
what the brief was.
Yes, I'd forgotten that you did all that. You were the one that did all these long phone calls, and
Yes.
then they'd sort of submit, sample arrangements, and then they'd come back and... sometimes a bit of tact is required.
And sometimes it wasn't.
And some of them were highly experienced, weren't they?
Yeah, there was one, and unfortunately we don't, because we've sold out a book 4, and I can't remember what the song was called, but it was a Mary Had a Little Lamb song that then disintegrated into something much heavier. And
it was pretty much metal,
I
wasn't
was
it, by the
so
end of
thrilled
it?
because I got a sort of heavy rock accompaniment in, including a real guitar slash. And there were emails going backwards and forwards about where this guitar interruption was going to come to get us from the lovely nursery rhyme into the rock. And I kept going, no, it needs to arrive on the 3rd quaver of bar 17. No, that's not arriving there, that's starting on the 3rd bar. No, it needs to start on... And it got immensely technical about where this single guitar slide needed to come. But we got it right in the end, and I love that because I snuck in some heavy rock just into the book. Because we had beautiful Disney stuff, we had jazz, we had folk... We had lots of different styles of world music,
obviously, to reflect our multicultural society here in the UK.
Beautiful Indian type song with accompaniment. Really loved that song. So there's so many different styles in there. I actually forgot to count them. I was going to. But that was huge fun because it was what style is going to fit this lyric, what style is going to fit this song. And when the arrangement came in, did it work? Did it actually reflect exactly what was going on in the music?
I think the first thing, you should know if you're interested in doing a big project like this is you have to be prepared to collaborate.
Yes.
I mean, this was a massive collaborative project. When we started off, it was... mostly me and Anna and the creative editor, Sheena. And then occasional meetings with the filming team who were doing the whole whiteboard thing.
We haven't mentioned them yet.
We haven't even mentioned Walk Tall Media.
Walk Tall Media,
What
and
a
Jackie
joy.
loved working with them. I mean,
Yeah.
I love video media anyway. I tend to think televisually, so the moment you give me a song or a line, I will tend to imagine it on television. So I loved working with the video people because we were videoing quite a lot of the songs,
Yes.
and there was so much intricate detail to play with.
I mean, for me at the beginning, that was because I'd never done any work of that type at all. So, you know, I'd go to these big planning meetings and sit there and occasionally throw in a word. But as we got further on, we realised that we actually needed to video some guide tracks as well as having the sort of the whiteboard presentation, the visual side. So we had to get actors in, and
I want to mention the list of people that we got, because there were some great people who did all our singing. So we have I had a list somewhere. Where have they gone?
Well, I'm just looking here.
Here we go. Right, vocalists and presenters. Rosemary Amuani. Rosemary was great. She was on Balamori. And she came in and sang some of the songs for us, and in fact videoed my song. I wrote lyrics to a song, which is great, and we still use that. Kim Chandler, the excellent Kim Chandler, who still holds the record for the most number of songs and the most number of the least number of correct notes. First takes. She managed to record 17 songs in one day, which is extraordinary.
Yes, Kim Chandler, you are the first take queen.
Absolutely. I actually appear on some of the songs. I sang some of the lines. Nigel Pilkington, Brigitta Roy, who's an old friend of ours, Kaz Simmons, Anthony Strong, Matthew White, now theatre director.
Yes.
So there were loads of people, and there was somebody else as well.
Yes, Cleveland Watkins. Yes, very well known jazz singer.
Yes.
So actually,
and one of the things about the singers was that we had specific rules for them, which was no vibrato.
No wobble.
No vibrato. Now, the reason that we wanted no vibrato was because we wanted the adult voices to sound as close to the kids' voices as possible. So we said no vibrato and a lighter sound. It was really interesting to find out how many singers automatically put vibrato in, and to actually ask them to take it out all the way through a song was quite something. And
occasionally we would have to stop and say, listen, you need to make that lighter, slightly brighter. Can you back off? Don't give us, such a high subglottal pressure. Children's voices are smaller. And that was such an interesting challenge. Really enjoyed that.
And props to Stephen Chadwick as well, who did all the recording for us and wrote several of the songs.
Yeah, so hours in the recording studio, hours in planning meetings. Occasional disagreements between the creative teams. I can remember one time when Jeremy and I pretty much had a standoff. And that was interesting, and the creative team were kind of in the studio looking to what are they going to do, these two, but we got there in the end.
We're lovely to work with. Most of the time.
Do you know, I think if we'd been a married couple, we wouldn't have had the standoff. I think, so there's one more thing
We were married at the time.
Yes, we were married at the time. Yeah.
So that, all gorgeous.
I just wanted to say one more thing, which was bear in mind that we're working with a generalist teacher here. So what we did at every stage was that we made it absolutely clear what the learning area was for a particular song. And then we would have teaching tips. So, for instance, I've got one here with a song in Book 3 called Circle Song. And the teaching tips are: fitting the words and melody together is an important singing skill. Help the children by practicing the second verse together slowly as a chant before singing it to the backing track. So little things like that where we thought, well, where are they going to trip up here? And sometimes in the teaching tips it would be, how do you move on? So we always had when and where. When can you use this? Maybe in relation to maths, and when you're learning about circles, the song's called Circle Song. So there's a cross-curricular link there. maybe as a stimulus for creating a dance in a sort of a physical session.
So there were always new ideas, that it wasn't just about singing the song, it was also about context
Very much so.
and variation.
And that's something that's incredibly important for schools, that sense of cross-curricular learning. And then guidelines for how to get started, how you're going to start teaching them, and then what you're going to do to move it on. You know, is there a higher level that you could do the song at? Could you explore it further? So we've got that at every single stage. I must say I'm very proud about that.
I just want to, before we move on to the next book that we wrote, I want to talk about Moveability, which was the one song that I wrote the lyrics for. And I'd just done some Qigong, a course that had Qigong in it, and there's a sequence of Qigong movements, and I went, I love this is really great, because I feel the energy flowing when I'm doing it.
Oh, anyone who has worked with the late Mary Beth Dame
Yes.
will be familiar with these moves. I think there's 8 different Qigong moves, and they are in fact a very nice physical integration warm-up.
So a song arrived on my desk, which was, I've even forgotten what it was called now. I think it was called Singability or something like that. And I just went, ooh, this is interesting. If we took the moves and the words from my sequence and we put them onto that song, that would actually work really well. So it became the song Moveability, and it was filmed for the video. And in fact, we've used it ever since. And we use it as a warm-up. We've actually used it as a warm-up on our courses. And I don't know whether it's anywhere online. I'll have a look. But what we found is that it was written for 9-year-olds. But we've had adults doing it. We've had drama students doing it in
apparently
the streets.
first year undergraduates
First
love
year
it
undergrads
as a warm-up.
love it. And it's all of the moves are set. The melody is 5-note pentatonic. So there are only 5 notes in it. And it's a very simple melody, it's a very simple rhythm, but the fun is in all the movements, and you do them one by one. And because they are Qigong exercises, you can feel the energy moving. It's a real energy warmer-upper. So love that song. Very pleased that that's out there.
Yeah, if we find a performance of it on YouTube,
Yep.
maybe we'll post the link to it.
And if
because
you want to do a performance, and let us know.
we would love to see
Yeah.
it. It's a terrific song.
Yeah.
We were very proud of that.
So we just spent a few minutes moving on, because at the same time as writing this, we were also invited to write a chapter for the Oxford Handbook of Singing on the pedagogy of sung genres.
Oh, and by the way, just because I needed more to do, I was in the process of doing my PhD at that time.
Right in the middle of it, yes, because we don't like being bored. So we were invited.
we've got books 1 and 2 done.
Yeah.
Then we moved house.
Yes. Then
which involved moving our business from London to
the Welsh borders, which is where we live now.
A more global place.
Then we did 3 and 4. And 3 and 4, just massive projects. And I think at the same time, we were writing the chapter for the Oxford Handbook of Singing, and that was with Lisa Popey in America.
Yes, and now the person responsible for this was my supervisor. Yes, because he knew I was very interested in genre. That was one of the main topics of my PhD, the main foci. And so he was one of the editors for the Oxford Handbook of Singing. Can you hold the tome up, please, Jeremy?
For the people on YouTube, you'll hear me grunting, because this is an 1,100-page book.
Yeah.
It is actually, if you're looking on YouTube, it's the one that's directly behind us in the centre. It's an amazing book. It has a who's who of music and vocal educators.
It's a fantastic resource, I have to say. An absolute labour of love.
Yeah.
3 editors, Professor Graham Welch,
yes.
David Howard,
Hi, David.
And John Nix.
Yes.
So Graham decided that I would be a very good person, and that to write together with Jeremy, to write a chapter on pedagogy of different sung genres. So, I mean, of course, we were thrilled, because
this is what we do.
At that point in time, 2010, there wasn't really that much out there about the pedagogy of non-classical genres.
Not in the academic world.
Yeah. And we felt quite honoured that we'd been asked to do that together with Lisa Popey from the US.
Yep.
as we felt that it was an affirmation, really, that we were the right people to talk about,
Yes.
if you like, comparative pedagogy between the genres.
So there's quite a lot in this
Yeah.
chapter. It's quite dense, and of course because we're writing for what is essentially an academic book.
Well, anything we wrote had to be evidence-based.
We had to prove
We
it.
couldn't just do, oh, this is because we do it, or because we like it, or because this is our opinion.
Yes.
And you need to bear in mind that when you write a chapter for an academic edited book, you will be peer reviewed, likely by some colleagues that you greatly esteem.
Yes.
And that's a process in itself, being prepared to take that on the chin.
And it was interesting because where we ended up going in terms of genres discussed, and we have a table, fortunately, Western lyric, which is basically classical, Western classical, opera, art song, and early music. And then CCM, or contemporary commercial music, musical theatre. Now, that's an interesting one for us because we sort of we think musical theatre is a genre all of its own, a section all of its own.
Fortunately, all three of us were agreed on that.
Yep. But in this table, we put it under CCM. Jazz, commercial music, pop, rock, R&B, including soul, country. So yeah, that was quite an enormous spread of stuff. And in fact, for the research that I did with All Music Database, there are something like 700 different genres just in contemporary commercial music.
Actually, it was very good that we had Lisa as a co-author on this, because she was kind of very on the money about all of these different areas.
Yeah.
She's taught a lot of the subgenres of contemporary commercial music.
Yeah.
And she also had a very good idea about the sort of the cultural aspect, the performance culture.
There was an interesting point, wasn't there, where we were asked to cover other stuff as well.
Ah, yes. Well, okay. So we submitted.
Sorry, I'm sorry, but this is a little ridiculous.
No, but this is what happens. So we submitted our first draft,
Yep.
and that was great. And they had a look at it.
Worked
and they said,
very hard on that draft.
Yeah, we like it. And of course, we were breathing a sigh of relief. That's great. And they came back to us and they said, well, we think that we need to include non-Western music. For instance, what about Indian and African and Chinese?
And the Home Alone look, where you're going hands on your face with your mouth open, we were going, hang on, we're already covering 700 different genres, and now you're asking us to cover entire country outputs.
So we said, no, it wouldn't,
We
not
said,
for us.
we don't know anything about that.
I mean, what the thinking quite rightly was, if we're talking about music culture, why are we only talking about Western music cultures?
Yeah.
And that was absolutely
Fair
appropriate.
enough.
But the amount of research and reading that would have been required to talk about a topic of which none of us knew anything.
Nope.
It just was not viable. So we
said no.
Please, can you find someone else to do that? And that is exactly what happened.
Computer says no.
So that's something that you can check out. We might even read you some of the chapter headings of this.
Yeah.
So yes, we got out of that one nicely.
But it was interesting because we're still talking about the same things. We're still talking about resonation, respiration, phonation, articulation. We're still talking about the same stuff, but in different genres. They have all sorts of different balances. And part of that comes from not just the history of the music, but the venue, the type of venue that they're played in, whether it's mic'd or not, and also what the audience expectations
The
are.
performance expectations,
Yep.
yeah. We also talked, didn't we, about, can you just sort of flip back?
Yes.
Because I quite like the heading before, the heading with the three, with yeah.
Genre, idiom, voice.
Yes, we came up with idiom. I mean, idiom is something that musicologists write about. And something that, one of the things that Lisa Popé brought to the table was her own kind of list of stylisms, where she'd sort of observed different almost vocal effects and different stylisms that are used in different subgenres. And we decided that we were going to call those idioms. So that we talk about general use of voice, genre expectations, and then what some of the stylisms might be. And you can just imagine the huge amount of information that you're sifting through and wanting to put in some kind of cohesive form so that people could read it and understand why singers might use their voices differently, what the reason would be, why they would sing their voices differently, what trends there are, and from that, what kind of teaching approaches might be used. So there was a massive amount to get through, and without some kind of framework, that would have been impossible.
Well, I think it was working the framework out took so much time because it was such an enormous topic to deal with. We just had to take a stance, literally, to be able to start something.
And I think that that's something that I'm probably quite good at. I mean, I was in the middle of doing a PhD, so I was having to think sort of categories and structural thought, and sometimes it can box you in, and you have to be careful about that.
Well, you essentially became lead writer on this. You were doing most of the writing of it, and Lisa and I were doing lots and lots of discussion and input on it, but also
I think I was being headmistress is really what he's saying.
No,
in
I'm
the most
not.
polite
No,
possible
I'm
way.
not. No, of the three of us, you were also the person who had the most experience with references.
I was looking at the academic targets, if you like. That was what I felt.
Anything
I
that
could
we
bring.
anything we put in the chapter had to have an academic reference of some kind. So, and that's really interesting because there are lots of things that we could have put in, particularly.
I mean, if it was anecdotal, we had to say
Anecdotal.
And Jeremy, I want you, before the end of this session, I want you to talk about
the transcriptions
and the survey.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But there's a table 35.3 on page 720.
You can buy the chapter separately,
you
folks. We will put links for you.
Where we talk about vocal effects and what the descriptions are, and obviously we're talking about tone onsets. So you've got the glottal, the aspirate or breath onset, and the glide onset, or the simultaneous, or the singer's onset, or smooth onset, whatever you want to call it. But then we got actually quite interesting quite fast. So we've got note arrivals. You've got fry, the yodel down, the yodel up, the squeeze, the growl, the pitch rise, the pitch fall, the short improvisation, and then a whole list of combinations that you could do. And I'm still using some of these in what we teach.
We had a lot of fun discussing those between the three of us, didn't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I introduced one to Lisa that she hadn't heard before. She went, "No, surely that doesn't exist." And I went, "Oh yes, it does. Here's an example of it." And that was the squeeze glottal, so which I have heard quite a lot since then.
Yeah, you can do that.
So that was fun. Okay, so you want to talk about the transcriptions?
Yeah, let's do that first, because we got to the stage where we thought they need to see something on paper. Now, as it happened, Jeremy was helping me with some transcriptions for my PhD, or maybe it was the other way around.
No, the PhD came later. Because you weren't at that stage yet.
I know. We went to Australia. It was our first teaching trip to Australia for ANATs and NewsATs as the master teachers for that particular 2011. Yeah. And we said we've got to make this tangible for people. So we found 2 recordings of Amazing Grace.
Now these specifically, they were a cappella recordings because I didn't want to have to deal with instrumentals. So we had Jessie Norman singing Amazing Grace, and that was on a French television programme about Martin Luther King. And she just sat in the chair having been interviewed and sang Amazing Grace. And then there's a really good video of Gillyanne Rhymes singing Amazing Grace, and she's standing in a church, and it is completely a cappella. So again, really useful to do. And we have such different performances. So one is very classical based. There is an element of gospel about it.
Jessie Norman slumming it.
Mostly we're talking classical. And then you have Gillyanne Rhymes, which is pop country, essentially. So there's 2 different flavours in there. And I transcribed them. So, and I think we might be able to put this up somewhere. It's probably, I can put it up on the
I don't see why you shouldn't.
The
I don't see why you shouldn't
website.
put the visuals up.
Yeah, because it is so amazing. It's so interesting just to see the notes that they were singing, the way that they moved between them. The one thing we didn't do was phonetic transcription, which would have driven me nuts. So if anybody wants to do a phonetic transcription of either of these recordings, please do. Please let us know. Any of you
phonetic geeks, yes, please do. And I think what's nice about this is that it reminds us that a piece of music on the page is only a guide,
Oh,
and that even a classical singer is lifting that music off the page. And you would be amazed
You will be.
how many pitch glides there are,
Pitch
even
glides,
in Jessie
extra
Norman's.
notes, yeah, and also which notes you pitch consonants on. I marked those as well. And when we got to Leanne Rhymes, I was marking yodel flips. I was marking creak onsets and offsets.
Fry onsets. if you
Fry
prefer.
onsets. I was marking slides and glides. I was marking notes that were in tune, notes that were out of tune. There's one particular thing which is an effect, which is to sing a note slightly flat, to make it sound like it's harder work than it actually is.
And also all the little ornaments that she puts in.
Yes.
Masses of little riffs.
I ended up using a little app at the time called The Amazing Slow Downer, just so that I could slow everything down to walking pace, but keep the pitch the same, so I could work out what some of the tiny little demi semiquavers are that she was putting in.
So if you haven't seen this chapter, have a look.
Yes.
Once we've got this up on the website, I think you'll find it really enlightening.
Yes. So that was, I'm not going to say that was fun to write, because it was actually very intense and hard work, but we're very proud of it.
Yeah.
And we still use things from that book.
Yes.
I want to talk about this whole business of when you have knowledge, how you then apply it, because knowledge is basically utterly useless unless it's applied. So it's taking information that we have.
That sounds like conversations we had when I was doing my PhD.
Yeah. It's when you take what you know and you work it to something, or you work it to an audience, or you work it to a singer.
Yeah. So you have that knowledge, and I was already doing a PhD when we started Singing Express. So how was I going to really bring that knowledge to a level that was going to be communicable to the generalist singing teacher and the primary school
I just remember
singer?
what ended up being my favourite phrase for a couple of years, which is, no, that's PhD speak.
Yeah, I got it you learned that from Anna. She said, I think, all right, thank you, Gilly, for a PhD moment now.
Yes, now can we make it practical?
Yeah. So...
And in fact, we're going to do a podcast in the future where we talk about how we take the A&P, the anatomy and physiology, language and information and knowledge that we already have, and how we work it for different audiences, because ultimately that's the goal.
That is the goal. That's very important, actually.
Yeah. So even writing this stuff, finding our voice was... And, oh, by the way, can we just talk collaborative writing? Mm-hmm. Can we talk collaborative writing, Gillyanne?
Can you be nice?
One of the things that Gillyanne does, we have very different styles of writing, because I will sit and I'll write something and I'll be really, really focused on it. And then I'll come out of the room and I go, hey, can I share this with you, and we'll talk about it. And Gillyanne is of the opinion that really she doesn't want to share anything at all with me until it's perfect.
I have a little nugget.
So 3 months later,
And
I'm
I have
going...
to grow my little seed.
Yes.
Yeah.
3 months later, I'm going, would you like to tell me what you're doing?
Yeah.
And it's been a little thing of gentle argument since 1999, in fact.
I think we got it
2000.
right when we wrote This Is a Voice. I think we did
Yes,
much better with
2016. That was 16
Yeah.
years later. 16 years it took us to actually be able to do the process in a way that worked for both of us.
that one. Yes. I think you put that really nicely.
Thank you.
I don't know, what else can we say? I don't think we
Oh.
should talk about the other chapter except to say that it exists.
The other chapter exists. No, I will mention it because this is in fact the opening chapter of the book, and it is the anatomy and physiology chapter written for academics.
So I just breathed out after finishing my PhD,
Yeah.
and guess what? An email comes through from Professor Welch saying, well, I need someone to write.
No. What he actually said was that basically that chapter in your PhD, in fact it was 2 chapters, wasn't it?
No, it was chapter 2.
Chapter 2
Yeah.
was so good that he wanted you just to morph it slightly to actually work for the
Yeah,
book. That's actually...
There was a little moment
keep
of pride.
doing yourself down.
Yes.
It's extremely good, and if you can get hold of that, it is one of the best chapters I've read.
Structure and Function of Singing
Structure and
Voice,
Function of Singing
I think
Voice.
it's called. Oh, can we just finish off with reading the section headings for the Oxford Handbook of Singing, because it
Let you do that.
is a fabulous resource. And Okay, so kudos to Professor Welch, David Howard and John Nix for this labour of love, because it takes a long time.
Yeah.
So you've got the first section is the anatomy and physiology of singing.
And bear in mind, in each of these sections, there are at least 4 different chapters by at least 8 different contributors.
Yeah. And my structure and function of singing voice was the first one. So I was the first chapter in the book, which is...
I think you're
little moment of pride.
You're one of the few people to have written a chapter by yourself.
Yeah, there are a few of us there, I can see. And then the next one is the acoustics of singing.
Yep.
With lots of lovely contributions there. The psychology of singing. And then the development of singing across the lifespan. Singing pedagogy, that was our second chapter, was in there. The collective choral voice. Wider benefits of singing, singing for health and singing and psychology. And then singing and technology.
And future perspectives.
And future perspectives, yeah.
It's such a great book, this.
Yeah.
I'm
I mean, every
very
time I open
proud.
it, I find something, oh, that looks so exciting.
Yeah, very proud to be part of that. I just want to finish with, why do we write books? Because I can tell you right now, it ain't for the money.
It ain't for the money. Oh, Lord. No,
I think with one of my books, I earned enough to have afternoon tea.
I don't know who you had afternoon tea at the Ritz with.
Now, I
me.
was going to say, it was afternoon tea at the Ritz, but then with another book, I've earned enough to have afternoon tea at the local pub.
Seriously.
You just don't make much money from books like this.
The reason why you write a book is because it has to be written. You have to share that you have a need to share some aspect of what it is you do, or some aspect of insight that you have, and you want to share it with the world. That's why you do it.
I think it's interesting, just because the first whatever I said. Well, in fact, if you count the Singing Express book and then the Singing Express songbook, we had 8 books in that series, but we count them as 4. I think it was the first 7 books were commissions, but even when you're offered a commission, you still have to go, do I really want to write this? What is it that I want to say? What do I have that will work really well, that will be strong and powerful?
And here we're talking about non-fiction, remember?
Yes.
It's still a creative act.
Still a creative
You can't
act.
do it. Speaking personally, if it's not a creative act, I can't do it.
It's interesting because I have the same thing with piano playing, which is if somebody asks me to accompany them in a recital, I will look at the music and the programming and go, do I actually connect with that? Do I want to play it? And if there are, usually in a recital, there's loads of stuff that I want to do, and there might be one piece that I'm going, oh, I really don't like this one. And I have to work really hard to find something that I want to share in that piece, something that I think is so special or so unusual or so something that I want to share it with the audience. And if I can do that, I can connect much deeper into the piece.
So, and
we did the same thing with the webinars. Every single one of the 18 webinars had a reason for its existence.
Yes.
There was something that we wanted to get out there. We were sick of the bullshit, and we wanted to get information, really clear, solid, practical, technical information out there.
Well, frankly, something exciting that you're doing in your lessons, and you're doing it on a regular basis, and you're thinking, I think other people would like to know about this.
Yes.
Now, we need to segue quickly to the end. Having said that, it's difficult to earn money from writing books. It's one of the reasons why I was self-publishing now.
Yes.
And Jeremy's first self-published book was How to Sing Legato.
How to Sing Legato. It was 7 years on the pot. I finally got off the pot and published it. Really pleased it went to number 1 on its first day. I love this book because it's the no bullshit. This is how legato works. This is what it is. This is it. Here are the exercises.
And it's gone down rather well, hasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Good. Can we finish in 3 minutes?
Easily. Yes.
Everybody, I have a lovely, relaxing Feldenkrais session coming up any minute now.
Of course you do. So yes. So we are being sponsored today by Canny Publishing, which is the publishing arm of Vocal Process, and How to Sing Legato was the first book that Canny Publishing produced. We're now up to 3. So thank you, Canny Publishing. Everything that we've mentioned, we will put links into the description box, and I think we're done.
I think we're done, yes.
Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
This is A Voice, a podcast with Dr. Gillyanne Case and Jeremy Fisher.